Hi there again, guys. How's it going? We're going to continue on Frindle today, chapter 6. Remember, Nick and Miss Granger kind of both had a little bit of, they both kind of got points in their court on that last chapter. We're going to see how this continues on. Chapter 6 is called The Big Idea. May I remind you, Janet Fisk was that one back in the beginning where Nick and Janet pulled that little peep, prank on their teacher. Janet's back. 3 things happened later that same afternoon, and this was the afternoon of the report. Nick and Janet Fisk had missed the bus because of a school newspaper meeting, so they walked home together. They were seeing who could walk off the curb without falling. It took a lot of concentration, and when Janet stepped off into the street, Nick said, "That's 3 points for me." But Janet said, "I didn't fall. I saw something. Look." She bent down and picked up a gold ballpoint pen, the fancy kind. Maybe like this? That was the first thing, Janet finding the pen. They got back on the curb and Nick followed Janet, putting one foot carefully in front of the other on the narrow concrete curb. And while he stepped along, he brought thought back over the school day, especially about his report, and what Miss Granger had said about words at the end of the period finally sank in. That was the second thing, understanding what Miss Granger had said. She said, "Who says dog means dog?" "You do, Nicholas." "You do, Nicholas," he repeated to himself. "I do?" Nick thought, still putting one foot in front of the other and following Janet. What does that mean? And then Nick remembered something. When he was about 2 years old, his mom had brought him one of those unbreakable cassette players and a bunch of sing-along tapes. He had loved them, and he played them over and over and over. He would carry the tape player, the tape and the player to his mother or his big brother or his father and bang them together and say, "Goala, goala, goala," until someone put the cassette in the machine and turned it on. And for 3 years, whenever he said, "Goala," his family knew that he wanted to hear those pretty sounds made with voices and instruments. That's when Nick went to preschool. He had learned that if he wanted his teacher and the other kids to understand him, he had to use the word music. But goala meant that nice sound to Nick because Nick said so. Who says goala means music? You do, Nicholas. "No fair," yelled Janet. They were at the corner of their own street, and Nick had bumped into her, completely absorbed in his thoughts. Janet stumbled off the curb, and the gold pen in her hand clattered to the street. I remember that, and I bet many of you listening could also relate to that. When you're, babies, as they're starting to learn, they create words, and then families associate those words with what they need or what they want. Nick is remembering that, and he is really kind of making that same connection that Mrs. Granger is saying too. "Sorry, I didn't mean to, honest," said Nick. "I just wasn't watching." "Here." Nick stooped over and picked up the pen and held it out to her. "Here's your..." And that's when the third thing happened. Nick didn't say pen. Instead, he said, "Here's your Frindle." "Frindle?" Janet took the pen and looked at him like he was nuts. She wrinkled her nose and said, "What's a Frindle?" Nick groaned and said, "You'll find out. See you later." It was there on the corner of Spring Street and South Grand Avenue, 1 block from home on a September afternoon. That's when Nick got his big idea. And by the time he had run down the street and up the steps and through the door and upstairs to his room, it wasn't just a big idea. It was a plan, a whole plan, just begging for Nick to put it into action. And action was Nick's middle name. Check this out. I love how this is called The Big Idea. And here we have Nick, and here's Janet, stepping off the curb, handing him the Frindle or the pen with this, bright shining lights, like, the moment. The next day after school, the plan began. Nick walked into the penny pantry store and asked the lady behind the counter for a Frindle. She squinted at him. "A what?" "A Frindle, please, a black one." And Nick smiled to her. She leaned over closely and aimed one ear at him. "You want what?" "A Frindle." This time Nick pointed at the ballpoint pens behind the shelf. Like this. a Frindle. A black one, please. The lady handed Nick the pen. He handed her the 49 cents and said, "Thank you," and left the store. 6 days later, Janet stood at the counter of the penny pantry. Same store, same lady. John had come in the day before, and Pete the day before that, and Chris the day before that, and Dave the day before that. Janet was the 5th kid that Nick sent in there to ask the woman for a Frindle. And when she asked, the lady reached behind the pens and said, "Blue or black?" Nick was standing one aisle away at the candy racks, and he was grinning. Frindle was a real word. It meant pen. Who says Frindle means pen? You do, Nicholas. Half an hour later, a group of serious 5th graders had a meeting in Nick's playroom. It was John, Pete, Dave, Chris, and Janet. And Nick. And that's 6 kids. 6 secret agents. They held up their right hands and read the oath Nick had written out. "From this day on and forever, I will never use the word pen again. Instead, I will use the word Frindle, and I will do everything possible so others will too." And all 6 of them signed the oath with Nick's Frindle. The plan would work. Thanks, Mrs. Granger. Oh my gosh, I feel like Mrs. Granger is sort of in for it. We're going to move on to Chapter 7, Word Wars. School was the perfect place to launch the new word, and since this was a major historical event, Nick wanted it to begin in exactly the right class, 7th period language arts. Nick raised his hand first thing after the bell rang and said, "Mrs. Granger, I forgot my Frindle." Sitting 3 rows away, John blurted out, "I have an extra one you can borrow, Nick." Then John made a big show of something in his backpack. "I think I have an extra Frindle. I told my mom to get me 3 or 4. I'm sure I have an extra Frindle in here yesterday, but I must have taken it. Wait, oh yeah, here it is." And then John made a big show of throwing it over to Nick, and Nick missed it on purpose, and then he made a big show of finding it. Mrs. Granger and every kid in the class got the message loud and clear. That black plastic thing that Nick borrowed from John had a funny name, a different name, a new name, Frindle. There was a lot of giggling, but Mrs. Granger turned up the power in her eyes and swept the room into silence. And the rest of the class went on according to plan, her plan. As everyone was leaving class, Mrs. Granger said, "Nicholas, I'd like to have a word with you." And she emphasized the word, word. Nick's mouth felt dry, and he gulped, but his mind stayed clear. He walked out to her desk and said, "Yes, Mrs. Granger." "It's a funny idea, Nicholas, but I will not have my class disrupted again. Is that clear?" Her eyes were lit up, but it was mostly light, not much heat. "Idea? What idea?" asked Nick, and he tried to make his eyes look as blank as possible. "What are you talking about? I don't know what you're talking about." "You know what I mean, Nicholas. I am talking about the performance that you and John gave at the start of class. I am talking about this." She held up her pen, an old maroon fountain pen with a blue cap. "But I really didn't have a Frindle with me," said Nick, amazed at his own bravery. And hiding behind his glasses, Nick kept his eyes wide and blank. "I really didn't have a Frindle." Mrs. Granger's eyes flashed and then narrowed, and then her lips formed a thin, hard line. She was quiet for a few seconds, and then she said, "I see. Very well, then. Nicholas, you may go." "Thanks, Mrs. Granger," said Nick, and he grabbed his backpack and headed for the door. And when he was just stepping into the hallway, he said, "And I promise I won't ever forget my Frindle again. Bye!" Oh my goodness. So we're going to stop there. Definitely. Do you think he's going to succeed? Like, how far do you think he's going to be able to take this? The whole school? Like, is she going to handle it? What do you think is going to happen? I'm dying to know your answers. Tell me what you think.